we introduce Lorna McGee, who is an incredible flute player and plays the first flute in the Pittsburgh Symphony and has been studying Alexander technique for a very long time.
I think it's probably useful for this interview too, that people know that I'm also an adjunct faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University. So there's that component to my playing life as well. I'm a performer and a teacher.
And we're going to have 3 little interviews speaking about music making and Alexander technique. So in the first section, in the first part of the interview, we're going to talk about learning Alexander technique. And we will spend a little bit of time of speaking about what it means to be a student of Alexander technique and a teacher who includes Alexander technique in her teaching. Do you remember why you started taking Alexander lessons?
I remember very, very clearly. I was about 17 years old. I was just starting out at the Royal Academy of Music in my first year there. I was incredibly driven and ambitious and terrified all at the same time, and also incredibly passionate about music. So that concoction led me to practice in a way that was misusing oneself. So I would get this left hand, on the flute, there's a lot of twisting and rotation, and then, the flute sort of rests here, sort of on the knuckle at the base of the index finger. And I was practicing so much, about 6 hours a day on average, with all of that sort of mental state that I described. And so practicing in not the wisest manner, just putting a lot of effort in, but not really knowing yet how to direct that effort, throwing myself at it essentially. And then this hand would go numb. And then I would have a lot of shoulder pain as well. So thankfully at the Royal Academy of Music, for the worst cases, they provided some Alexander technique lessons, and it was one-on-one lessons. And, actually, I know many schools offer general Alexander technique classes, but what the Academy did was it was more pain related. Like if students were really in pain and in danger of injury, or were injuring themselves, they provided the Alexander one-on-one. So that was my first introduction to the Alexander technique, and I had one-on-one lessons with the wonderful Ilana Machover, and I would go up to her house in London, and I have very, very happy memories.
Well, when you started lessons, what actually did you notice?
I actually think the first thing I noticed was her presence. When I actually think about, what I learned, I think one of the most powerful teaching tools was what she modeled. She modeled this ease. She modeled a serenity, a peacefulness, a liveliness, an ability to stay in one center. So I do remember in one of the first lessons, it was sort of actually recognizing, well, she was teaching that you have a choice of how you respond to a stimulus. So she would say, when the doorbell rings, when the telephone rings, you don't need to rush towards that. And it was a metaphor for any stimulus. So here I was as a first-year music student rushing towards my destiny that I had playing out in my head. I need to become a great flute player in a very short amount of time. So just even that modeling of how to be present. So that I would say that was perhaps the biggest lesson I learned right off the bat. And that was more just being in the presence of somebody who was walking the talk, which was very inspiring. I remember in the first few lessons doing semi-supine, and she would ask me to make triangles with my arms. Sometimes she would just let me be there for a moment or two, and just make triangles with your arms, and then she would come in to the room and we'd start the lesson. She also used these lovely beanbags a lot, so that, and we would play with that. So there was a playful element to the lessons too. Can you stay in length? Can you not grasp at trying to catch the beanbag? Can you be coordinated? So in movement, can you be dynamic and coordinated and peaceful? So those lessons were really incredible. And in a very short space of time, I was pain-free. The problems with my hand went away. Like in Ilana, I had a model of how to conduct yourself in a way that was more peaceful, more constructive, less rushed, also just very practical and grounded. And so I tried to bring that to my practice and to my
So that's
studies.
my next question. How did you start bringing it into music and practice and flute?
Yeah, so really my experience with Alexander Technique lessons essentially taught me how to practice. So just to rewind a little bit, so through my private Alexander lessons, I not only found a way to be pain-free, but also what was very thrilling to me, and what was an incredibly powerful motivator was that my playing, my sound just opened up. And it was also less effort. I was working less, but getting results that were 10 times better. And you kind of get drunk on that. Like I wanted that sound all the time. So why would I not pay attention to the way I was using myself? So I would say that just the principles of Alexander Technique, of the inhibition, direction, leading with the head, not end gaining, concentrating on the means whereby, that's just basically a blueprint, a template for how to practice. And so I would not waste any time flailing, throwing myself at something the way I had previously done. I would pay attention to, how am I using my hands? How is my head right now? Is my neck free? What is the most constructive way I can approach this difficult piece, or this difficult problem I need to solve? How can I find coordination? And so the lessons were incredibly empowering from the point of view of actually developing discipline. You know, and this is something I know we can talk a lot about more in my own teaching, but it gives a framework, a constructive framework, to help you problem solve and to also help you be aware of your own mental state. I became much, much, much more aware and much more disciplined, I think, about just not letting your emotions run away with you. I mean, it's easier said than done. And I didn't always manage it. So I remember as a student, certain competition situations that I was in, and very, very, very stressful situations where, of course, you default, you go back, you revert. And those were also very powerful teaching tools because they made me realize the importance and that these old habits will show up when you're under pressure. That's just the nature of things, and be ready for that and don't be swept off your perch. And so that helps me a lot with my teaching now. But some of those failures were very, very instrumental in helping me also refine my relationship to the Alexander work. And I remember once before a concert, it was an important concert, chamber music concert at the Wigmore Hall, and I could not find my tone that I was looking for, and when you're nervous and you're under pressure, your breathing is a little bit more constrained, and you're just sort of holding a little bit more in your chest and your torso. I did all the warm-up exercises I could think of for tone, and then I just surrendered and did my semi-supine, and there it was. That after that, the tone was back. So learning how to take care of yourself in the midst of basically learning how to teach yourself. Yeah, it really taught me how to be a student, actually.
So, you've been on this journey of Alexander Technique and music making for quite a few years with different teachers. And so now, after so many years of exploring these ideas, do you still send directions? Do you still do semi-supine? Do you still do this internal dialogue with yourself? Do you still tell yourself to free the neck and take the head forward and up? How do you apply these principles today? Or checkmark, did it 10 years ago, it's gone?
No. If I don't do my semi-supine, I really notice it. If I don't do it every day, I really notice it. Shows up immediately in my playing. It's less coordinated in terms of the fingers. The sound and the breathing are less good. So I'm a professional flute player. Why would I not do it? Why would I want to sound worse? so it's uncompromising. And I would say, and this ties in with how I teach as well. Basically, every time I practice, it's about teaching yourself. It's not just about habit. It's about listening and then teaching yourself. And it's also, this is something I've been trying to develop a lot more in my teaching, and is to try and give my own students a better foundation in terms of being more proactive. So often in the music world, the model of how we practice is you try something, and then if something goes wrong or you're not happy with it, then you react, and then you try and correct it. So there's a lot of this, the sort of traditional model of practice is play, correct, play, correct. So instead of that, I try in my practice, and I try and instill this in my teaching, is to be more proactive. And this is something from Alexander Technique. Create the right circumstances for you to go right. You know, we talk about Alexander Technique as re-education,
Mhm.
re-education of the self. And really the teacher is empowering the student to re-educate themselves. So that's what practice is. That's what, I mean, I find that practice is basically just constantly refining my kinesthetic map, and constantly finding more ease in the coordination and more effortless effort. And that's what I'm interested in. So in the orchestra, we have a very fast turnover of repertoire. So, you know, you finish one program, you need to be working on the next program. And for example, this coming week in the Pittsburgh Symphony, there's a lot of really hard music. So there's a lot of potential triggers right there. There's a lot of stressors. There's a lot of notes and a ton of music to learn, and a lot of it's very fast, and a lot of it will be quite exposed. And so my Alexander training, and you know, the way I described how empowering it was as a student, you know, that is the framework for how I practice today. So I'll do a lot of chunking where I'll bring, you know, very small increments, but just brilliant coordination with a free neck, with, you know, with the arms released from the back, you know, to the best of my ability, you know, not holding at the hips, you know, releasing the legs away, you know, having done my semi-supine, having done a good warm-up where you're constantly refining your kinesthetic map, and then you bring that to the table when you're learning these new pieces that have to be ready in a short space of time. And it is a discipline, you know, the Alexander Technique is this beautiful constructive framework, and a philosophical framework, psychophysical. I'm not a trained Alexander teacher myself, but I use the principles, and I use what I can of the technique on myself all the time in my playing. And the discipline of it is the concert is going ahead next weekend. The concerts are going ahead next weekend, whether I'm ready or not, whether I'm in a flap or not, whether I'm flustered or not, whether I'm coordinated or not, they're going ahead. So I might as well be coordinated. I might as well try to practice in that mindful way, so I don't hurt, so I don't hurt myself, B, so I don't sabotage myself. So it's all these same constructive principles that I learned as a student and applied when I was a student. I'm applying them every day as a professional, even more so because the stakes are much higher. Also being very aware of your mental state. Like, I try my best to be very grounded and realistic, not cramming, not, you know, practicing far enough out from the actual concert that it's manageable, that you're not having to cram. But in situations where you don't have as much time as you want, you refuse to get flustered. You just refuse. And so that's where it's quite a discipline, I have to say, because it's much, much, much easier to get flustered. And so it's actually
Get
a
into
kind of,
the habit or not pay attention,
yeah.
not be in the moment. Oh.
Yes, and there's sometimes when you want to be able to play something right away, and then you have to deal with your own ego. Actually, Lorna, you can't play it right now, so deal with it. And so instead of throwing yourself at it again and again, hoping that this next time it will go right, you know, and then those anxieties will be soothed. Instead, you do the real work, which is just getting coordinated and paying attention to your psychological state, just being very real about it, and practical and courageous and professional, actually just professional.